All right, we'll say good morning. Let us begin a beautiful daf out of us today. We'll begin by thanking our sponsors, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Av, Max and Brenda Lapkovsky, in honor of the upcoming bar mitzvah of their son Yitzchak Meir, Dr. Riva Mitzner, commemoration of the first yarzheit of her father, Dr. Schneck, Aryeh Ben Chaim, and Jack Bennett, in honor of Sargent, memory of Sergeant עומר, טביב, who was killed by a Hamas Anti-Tank Missile on the Gaza border on May 12th, 2021. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamas will have an aliyah and the families a nechama. Let's read that. Let us begin. So today's daf is Chav Zayin 27. Really an incredible daf out of us today. We are picking up in Meretz Hashem on Chav Vav Amud Beis 26b. And we are picking up kind of in the middle of Amud Beis, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Hayilodim. So we'll say, so remember again, we were discussing the interesting conversation regarding the halachos of tefillin. Shinas keva, shinas arai, a nap, a deeper sleep. So now the Gemara says as follows, almost smack in the middle of Amud Beis. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Hayilodim li'olam choltzim, ve'enon manichim. Yiladim, Rabbi said, we often translate Yiladim as children, but really again, Rashi says it's bachrim, young men. Young men should always go ahead and take off their tefillin, ve'in manichin, and they should not leave it on even for a nap. Why? Because ultimately, again, it's common for them. Now Rashi assumes tumah in this context means a seminal emission. It's common for them to have a seminal emission. So what is that? So we'll see. Lema kasar biosi. Baal Keri Asher Aniach Tefillin, is that saying that Rabbi Yossi holds that a Baal Keri, a man who had a seminal emission, is prohibited from wearing tefillin? Amrabaye biyiladim v'nishosehem imahem askinon. No, we're talking about young men, young married men, whose wives are with them. So a young married man whose wife is with him should not go ahead and even nap when wearing tefillin, because there's a concern that he's going to be intimate with his wife he's going to be intimate with his wife while wearing tefillin. So the Gemara says, the Gemara says, if let's say a person was wearing tefillin and forgetting that he was wearing tefillin ended up having relations while wearing tefillin, so we learned in yesterday's daf that if a man becomes a Baal Keri when wearing tefillin, ideally he has to remove the tefillin, but he shouldn't remove the tefillin by touching it directly. Instead, what should he do? Now it's even more. He really should not touch the ritzua, the strap, or the ketzitza. The ketzitza is the bayis, ad sheyitol yodav v'yitleim, until he goes ahead and washes his hands. Ultimately, again, because hands often touch covered parts of the body. Good. So we'll say that brings to a close our sugya regarding tefillin. Now, what I would like to kind of end off this sugya with, although I'm trying to be very, very mindful of the time. Maybe we'll come back to it. Just remind me, I'm going to try to leave a few minutes over, this very interesting discussion regarding sleeping shisin nishmin biyom. Remember again, the Gemara had a discussion that a person shouldn't sleep more than shisin nishmin, 60 horse respirations by day. So I'm going to try to save a little bit of time at the end to go back to that and to discuss what exactly. Fine, let me just do it now. So the Gemara says as follows. Well, so listen to this. So this is in the Shulchan Aruch. I'll just do this really very quickly. I'm going to give you the Ma'ar Makom. I'm going to speak about it for a minute, and then you're going to look at the rest of it on your own. Simin Dalid Siftes Zayin in Orach Chaim, all the way to the beginning of Shulchan Aruch. So Shulchan Aruch writes as follows. Listen to this. David, refers to David HaMelech, Haya Nisar Shalalishan Shisin Nishmin. David HaMelech was careful to never sleep more than Shisin Nishmin, which again we've translated as 60 horse respirations, Kedei Shelo Yitom Tam Misa. Now, David HaMelech did that because, again, the Gemara discusses that sleep is 1/60th of death. David HaMelech never wanted to enter into the category or into the framework of death, and therefore he was careful to never sleep more than Shis and Nishman. Now, the Ramah comments on this. The Ramah says, Hagah, Ubigimara Perak HaYashin, quoting our Gemara Mesech Sukkah, Mashma de Dafka Biyom Hayanisar. So we'll say already a fascinating machlokes comes up. The Ramah comments that David HaMelech was only careful not to sleep Shis and Nishman by day, which, by the way, is really the context of our Gemara, sleeping by day. But at night, David HaMelech would sleep whatever he would sleep. So the Mishnah Berurah comments on this. The Mishnah Berurah says, the Dafka Bayom, by the way, I sent this out to you on the WhatsApp chat yesterday. You actually have this PDF of the Shulchan Aruch. But again, you can follow along or not. Mishnah Berurah says, Hisigal Avachronim, Delo Nimtza Shamkim B'Gimar Rak Ala Moroim, Aval David Ba'atzmo Gam Belayla Haya Nisar, V'nafkamina Kozel Didan, Shebal Nafesh Yachmir Al Kol Panim Bayom. Both listen to this. So the Mishnah Berurah comments, and the Mishnah Berurah says, by the way, there is no indication from David HaMelech that this was only by day. Other commentaries explain that David HaMelech was actually makpid to never sleep more than Shis and Nishman in general, by night and by day. But the Mishnah Berurah says, most of us are not going to be makpid on this at night, but at least to try to be makpid on this by day. By day, not to sleep more than Shis and Nishman. The Mishnah Berurah makes another statement. Also, listen to this. Ve'ein Shabbos bichlal zeh. The Mishnah Berurah says Shabbos is not included in this, right? In the Shis and Nishman idea. He goes ahead. So he quotes a number of different things. What about the shir of Shis and Nishman? So how long is this? So the Ber Halacha writes over here as follows: Rabu bohadeos b'shir zeh. So ultimately, again, there are many different opinions. Yesh omrim duhu gimel. It's on the second page of your PDF. Yesh omrim duhu gimel shows. Some say that Shis and Nishman is 3 hours. 3 hours. V'raya mehad Arizal hayoshem b'Shabbos b'ezeh gimel shows. Some bring a raya to that because the Arizal would sleep 2 or 3 hours on Shabbos afternoon. And the Ari would not have slept 2 or 3 hours on Shabbos afternoon if what? If it was usher to do so. Now that's interesting because the Mishnah Berurah just said that the issue of Shis and Nishman doesn't apply on Shabbos. That's clearly not agreed upon by everyone. There are many who say that Shis and Nishman does apply on Shabbos. So he gives a whole different v'yesh dochin. Others say it's not the case. They quote other opinions. Some say Shis and Nishman is a half hour, and others say that it's 2 or 3 minutes. So I just want to point out, we go literally again from 2 or 3 minutes to 2 or 3 hours. Let's say, what's the takeaway? The takeaway is, don't sleep your life away. That's the takeaway from this. That at the end of the day, a person should not lose out on the opportunities of life because they are sleeping. That's what David HaMelech was sensitive to. There's so much to do. There's so much to accomplish. There's so much to be. There's time to sleep after 120. Don't utilize the precious moments of life sleeping, but rather utilize them doing. Good, let's go weiter. Says, I told you, only 30 seconds. Says the Mishnah, we'll say now we get into some of the very interesting halachos regarding Sukkah, namely, again, what you have to eat in the Sukkah, what you don't have to eat in the Sukkah. So one time a story occurred. They brought food to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai to go ahead and taste it. Schneck kosavos udeli shamayim. And Rabbi Gamliel, they brought him 2 dates and a bucket of water. Va'amru, and they said, Halum l'sukkah. So in both of these cases, Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai told their attendants, bring the food into the sukkah and we'll have it there. We'll have it there. Now, listen, in both of these cases, you're talking about a relatively small amount of food, right? Remember again, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, the lashon of the Mishnah is litom, a te'ima. They wanted him to taste something. 2 dates and a glass of water, certainly not a meal. Nevertheless, in these cases, they told their attendants, bring the food into the sukkah. And when they would give Rab Tzadok food less than the volume of a beitza, of an egg, notel b'mapa, he would go ahead and wrap it in a cloth va'achlo chutz l'sukkah. he would eat it outside of the sukkah, and he would not bench afterwards. Now, there's a lot of stuff happening in that episode with Reb Tzadok. So when they would bring Reb Tzadok food less than a kibetza, three things would occur. Number one, he would hold it while in a cloth. Number two, he wouldn't eat it in the sukkah. Number three, he would not bench. Look at Rashi. Natal b'mapa, lo natal yadav. But say he would not wash his hands. He wouldn't do netilas yadayim. Ela karach b'mapa yadav mishum nikias. Dekasavar pachos mikebetza lo bay netilas yadayim v'lo bay sukkah v'lo bay birchas hamazon. Reb Tzadok was of the opinion that bread less than a kibetza does not require netilas yadayim, right? Especially if you're not going ahead and directly holding the bread itself, rather being korech b'mapa, holding it in a cloth. Number two, it doesn't require netilas yadayim. Number three, it doesn't require benching. Why doesn't it require benching? So Rashi goes on to say, because Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion, Meseches Brachos, v'achalta v'savata uveirachta. When is there an obligation to go ahead and what? To go ahead and bench? Only when what? V'savata. One is satiated. Says the Gemara, my salistar. The Gemara says, I don't understand. In the previous Mishnah, we said, Ochlin v'shosin aray chutz l'sukkah, that you could have a snack, achilas aray, a non-meal, outside of the sukkah. Now here in this Mishnah, what are you starting with? Two stories of where these Rabbanim ate their snacks inside of the sukkah. So is the story coming to contradict the rule we espoused before? To which the Gemara says, no. In fact, there's a piece missing. There's some wording missing, and here's how you have to read it. Im bala hachmir al atzmo machmir v'lespe mishum yehura. So we're supposed to listen to this. The way what the Mishnah is teaching us is as follows. The halacha is achilas aray can be eaten outside of the sukkah. That is the halacha. And I will say, why are you permitted to eat achilas aray outside of the sukkah? Why is that mutter? Because at the end of the day, your sukkah is like your home. Just like in your home, it's very common to eat a snack on the go, and you won't eat a snack inside of your house. So to your sukkah, you can eat a snack outside of your sukkah. What's happening over here in our Mishnah? If a person wants to be machmir on themselves and eat everything, even a snack inside of the sukkah, it's permitted. And both say it doesn't look like spiritual arrogance. It's an interesting idea in halacha. That a person should refrain from certain activities, even spiritual activities, if it has the appearance of arrogance. I'll give you an example. So the Mishnah Berurah comments. He says, by the Hasidim, they put on tefillin of Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. So the Mishnah Berurah says, what happens if a person wants to start putting on Rabbeinu Tam tefillin? I just want to put on. So interesting, the Mishnah Berurah says, Mechsi kihura. It looks like spiritual arrogance. We don't do it. We don't do it. So because we don't do it, not by the Hasidim I'm talking about, but because we don't do it, there are certain things where if you go above and beyond the norm, so it looks like arrogance. It's this interesting idea, because on one hand, we're always pushing ourselves to do more, to be more, to actualize more, but yet sometimes there is a situation where what you're doing is such a departure from the norm that it looks arrogant. So the Gemara is saying over here, the Mishnah is teaching me, you don't have to eat achilas aray inside of the sukkah. But if you want to be machmir, you can be machmir. And there is no achila, and there is no yuhura. There's no arrogance. The Gemara says, "Umaysinami ve'avilo Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai litam esat havshil u'Rabbi Gamliel Schneck salvos v'deli shamayim." Because one time they brought Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai to taste some of the food, and they brought Rabbi Gamliel 2 dates and a bucket of water, top of chav zayin. Va'amru halum l'sukkah, and they said to their attendants, bring the food into the sukkah. Ukishanasnu lo Rabbi Tzadok. Ochel pachos mikabetza. Similarly, when they gave to Rabbi Tzadok food less than the volume of an egg, natlo b'mapa, he took it in a cloth. Va'achlu chutz l'sukkah, he ate it outside of the sukkah. V'lo beirach acharov, and he did not bench afterwards. So the Gemara just infers hakibetza by sukkah. So that sounds like if you have an egg's volume, you do require a sukkah. Lema tehevet tiyuf to Rabbi Yosef v'Abaye. I guess this is a refutation of the position of Yosef and Abaye, to which the Gemara says, Dilma, pachos mikabetza, Netila ubracha lo boy. Maybe if you have food that's less than a beitza, so ultimately, again, it doesn't require netilas daim, and it doesn't require birchas hamazon. However, hakebeitza, but an eggs volume, boy netila ubracha would require both washing as well as a bracha. And I both say, so I want to point out I sent out to you on the WhatsApp chat the Shulchan Aruch on this sugya. What you have to eat in the sukkah and when you have to eat it is a more involved conversation. The general klal is you're only chayiv to eat achilas keva, right? What we'll call quote unquote a meal inside the sukkah. Achilas aray does not require a sukkah. That's the simplified version. The halacha l'maaseh is a bit more complex because then we get into again chameshes minei dagan, grain-based items, right? Even eating a bit more of that might require a sukkah. So we'll have to find an opportunity to delve into those halachos a little bit more. But at least kind of as an overarching principle, we do accept this principle. Achilas keva has to be in the sukkah, but achilas aray does not. I will say, just to show you how it gets a little bit complicated sometimes, wine. Do you have to drink wine in a sukkah? Do you have to drink wine in a sukkah? So interestingly enough, wine is an interesting thing because since wine is chashuv, right? Sometimes the mere consumption of wine itself is considered like achilas keva. So for example, if you're just having a little bit of wine, technically speaking, a little bit of wine would not require a sukkah. But let's say if you're going to have an next two revesim, right? You're going to drink 2 reviuses of wine. You would require a sukkah. Well, so, you know where this comes up? This comes up. Fascinating situation. Havdalah. Havdalah on, let's say again, Shabbos Chalamayid, or Havdalah, I should say, on Matzah Yom Tiv, right? Going into Chalamayid, right? Do you make a leishev basukah when you make Havdalah or not? So what does it depend on? What does it depend on? How much wine you're going to drink. So conventional wisdom is drink an additional revius of wine in addition to Havdalah. This way, first of all, you never go wrong by drinking an additional revius of wine. Klal gadol in life. But over here, you drink an additional revius, you make a leishe basukah. So just pointing out to you, drinking an additional revius of wine, would we automatically assume that that's called achilas keva? No. So again, the principle is correct. Of course, the principle is correct. Right? The principle, as the Gemara is saying it over here, is the one we follow halacha l'maisa. But the actual details are a bit more involved. The Meretz will have the opportunity to come back to it. Good. Says the Mishnah. Both say this is actually quite a fascinating sugya. Excuse me. Good. Mishnah. Really exciting. Rabbi Eliezer Omer. Suudos chayiv adam le'echol b'sukkah. Listen to this. Rabbi Eliezer holds that you are obligated over the course of Yom Tiv to eat 14 meals in the sukkah. So, right, an obligation of 14 meals. Achaz bayom va'achaz balayla. Where do you get 14? 7 days of Sukkot, because remember again, Shmini Atzeres is not part of Sukkot. 7 days of Sukkot, 1 meal by day, 1 meal by night. The Chacham say ein ledavar kitzvah. The Chachamim say no. There is no obligation to have meals every single day. Right, Abbas, and I want to point out there is an independent mitzvah of the samachta bechagecha, which is a general simcha, which is a general mitzvah of simcha on Yom Tiv, and at least for men, that simcha is in food, right? Basar and yayin. But we're not talking about that. What we're talking about over here is the general obligation of sukkah. So Rabbi Eliezer holds the mitzvah of sukkah itself generates an obligation for 14 meals, 2 meals a day. The Chacham say there is no minimum or maximum number of meals you have to have in the sukkah. You want to eat, you don't want to eat. One exception, chutz me'leili Yom Tov Rishon shel Chag bilvad. The only exception is the first night of Yom Tiv. On the first night of Yom Tiv, there is an obligation to go ahead and have a meal. That's the only obligation you have. So again, I want to point out about if you look at Rashi ein ledavar kitzvah, imratza lehis anos. Ain't on a zukukin lo. But listen to this. The Chachamim say, if you don't want to eat over Sukkot, that's your business. That's your business. So you want to eat, you don't want to eat, that's up to you. The only thing the Chacham say you must do is have a Su'udah the first night of Yom Tiv. So the Gemara says, Va'od, Amar Rabbi Eliezer, listen to this. Mishalo achal Yom Tov Rishon, or Leili Yom Tov Rishon, Yashlim Yom Tov Ha'acharon Shel Chag. So let's listen to this. Rabbi Eliezer says, what happens? Yeah, both say, here's what's interesting. Rabbi Eliezer agrees with the Chachamim on the first meal, right? Because the Chacham say you have to have the first meal the first night of Yom Tov. Rabbi Eliezer, of course, agrees with that because that's part of Rabbi Eliezer's 14. What happens if you missed the first meal, right? What happens if, again, first night of Yom Tov, you didn't eat. You fell asleep, you didn't eat. Rabbi Eliezer says something amazing. You're obligated to make it up. You're obligated to make it up. And he says you can make it up even into what? Even into Shmini Atzeres. And I both say, now that's quite interesting because as we're going to see, Shmini Atzeres is really reckoned as a separate, independent Yom Tov. Nevertheless, so I both say two halachas Rabbi Eliezer is saying. Number one, well, 3 halachas. Number one, you need to have 14 meals. Number two, if you missed night 1, you have to make it up. And number 3, you can make it up even into Shmini Atzeres. The Chacham say, well, say, listen to this piece of the Mishnah. Chacham say, Ein ledavar tashlumin. The Chachamim say that once you miss the meal on the first night, there's no makeup. There's no makeup. Well, say, listen to this. V'al zeh ne'emar. And about something like this, it is said, quoting the pasuk from Tehillim, Mu'uvas lo yuchal liskon. That which is crooked, right? That which is crooked cannot be straightened out. The chesron lo yuchal lihimanos, and that which is missing cannot be counted. In other words, the Chachamim say there are things in life that if you miss the opportunity, you miss the opportunity. I've often found that this is one of the most haunting psukim in all of Tanakh. The chesron lo yuchal lihimanos. Sometimes in life you miss opportunities, and once you miss it, you can never regain it. It doesn't mean there aren't other opportunities. There'll be different opportunities. But sometimes when it's in the Maisa B'chol Yom, opportunities come our way, and we say later, whatever you fill in the blank, I'll get to it later. And then finally, when we realize that, wow, this is a great opportunity, we want to take it, it's gone. It's gone. Almost as if we have this expectation that the opportunities of life will wait for us, but they never do. They never do. V'chesron lo yuchal lihimanos. So it's really 2 parts. Muvas lo yuchal liskon. Sometimes you break something and you can't fix it. V'chesron lo yuchal lihimanos. And sometimes you miss opportunities and you can't regain them. So the Chacham say, once you miss your opportunity on the first night of Yom Tov to have your Suda, you're done. There's no makeup for that. But when I was preparing that, I thought to myself, can you imagine what a schus it is to think about that the only missed opportunity you ever had in life was a meal, right? What a great place to be in, right? Yeah, I missed the meal opportunity. Halavai v'shlo bizocha, that should be our missed opportunities of life. So the Gemara goes weiter. But it's very exciting sugya. My time at Rabbi Eliezer. What's Rabbi Eliezer's logic of 14 meals? So he says teishvu ke'ein taduru, because he paskins that halacha l'maisa, you have to live in your sukkah the same way you dwell in your home. Madira achas bayom va'achas ba'layla. Just like a dira, right? Just like ultimately, again, in your home, you normally eat 2 meals. It's actually very interesting. They didn't eat 3 meals a day, right? They ate 2 meals, right? They ate 2 meals. Really what they ended up eating, was like a later breakfast and an earlier dinner, right? We know because, again, the Gemara talks about the power of pas shachris, of eating in the morning. And interestingly enough, people were makbid to eat before it got dark outside, because the Gemara discusses that a summa, a blind person, is never full, which is actually interesting because the Gemara assumes that part of the eating experience is seeing what you eat, which is interesting. I guess, people talk about I feel like presentation. There's something to it. There's something to it. Part of the enjoyment of eating, ultimately, again, is presentation. So the Gemara says, achas bayom va'achas balayla, af sukkah, achas, but just point out, can't focus. Af sukkah, achas bayom va'achas balayla. So to sukkah, 2 meals, 1 by day, 1 by night. That's Rabbi Eliezer's shita. V'rabbanan kedira. So we'll say the Rabbanan agree, yeah, your sukkah looks just like your house. How so? Madira iboy achil iboy lo achil. Av sukkah nami iboy achil ilo boy achil. And then Rabbanan will say, yeah, in your home, do you have an obligation to eat 2 meals a day? You have an obligation? If you want to eat, you eat. If you don't want to eat, you don't want to eat. So too in the sukkah, if you want to eat, you'll eat. If you don't want to eat, you don't eat. So we'll say, so interestingly enough, both Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanan are actually agreeing on the principle. The principle is that your life in your sukkah must mirror your life at home. Rabbi Eliezer will say, you eat 2 meals, most people eat 2 meals a day. So therefore in your sukkah, you have to eat 2 meals a day. The Rabbanan say, no, most people what? Eat when they want to. so too in your sukkah you could eat when you want to. Says the Gemara, well, Rabbanon, if that's the case, that just like in your house you eat when you want to, so in your sukkah you should eat when you want to, the same halacha should apply for the first night of Sukkot as well. For the first night of Sukkot as well, to which the Gemara says, so in other words, why Rabbanon do you say that there's an obligation to have a meal on the first night? Wow, Rabbi say Gzereshava Tesvav, Sukkot and Pesach. Incredible. Both say it says 15th by Pesach and it says 15th by Sukkot. Just like by Pesach, the first night of Pesach, there's an obligation to have matzah, right? The rest of Pesach, you want to eat matzah, you don't want to eat matzah, that's up to you. But the first night of Pesach, you have to eat matzah. Afkan, Laila Rishon, Chova. So too over here by Sukkot, you can sit in the sukkah, you don't want to sit in the sukkah. First night, you have to have a meal in your sukkah. Mikan ve'ilich rishus. But for the rest of Sukkot, whatever you want to do is your business. Same way on the rest of Pesach, you want to eat matzah, don't want to eat matzah, that's up to you. So to Sukkot, you want to sit in the sukkah, don't want to sit in the sukkah, that's up to you. But the Gzera Shavav Chamishasar, Tesvav says like just as matzah is obligatory on the first night, so to sukkah is obligatory on the first night. I says the Gemara Hamas Anti-Tank. By the way, how do you know that matzah is obligated, that there's an obligation of matzah on the first night? Amr Kra, Ba'erev Tochlu Matzos. Because the Pasuk says that night, first night of Pesach, you shall eat matzah, hakasav kavo chova. The pasuk ultimately again has established it as an obligation. But so I just want to point out this. So therefore, again, here's what comes out. First of all, we don't pass like Rabbi Eliezer, we pass like the Rabbanon. So there is no obligation to have 14 meals over the course of Pesach. Sukkot. However, we do paskin that eating in the sukkah on the first night is a biblical obligation. Mitzvah d'oraisa. And where is it gleaned from? Right here. Gzereshava Tesvav, Chamishasar, between Pesach and Sukkot. Just like Pesach, you have to eat matzah on the first night. So too, again, Sukkot, you have to eat in the sukkah on the first night. And I will say this is very important. This is why on the first night of sukkah, we're obligated to eat in the sukkah, even under circumstances in which we would normally be exempt for the rest of Sukkot, right? It's pouring on the first night. What do you do? Well, first you wait, right? But let's say it's not stopping. What do you do? You make Kiddush, you make Hamotzi, right? And then you could continue the rest of the meal in your house. What are you talking about? Kiddush and Hamotzi, right? We just learned this. That's mitzvah. Right? If it's raining inside of your sukkah, you're not obligated to sit and eat in your sukkah, because again, you wouldn't sit and eat in your home if there was a leak in the roof in a particular room. But yet again, because the first night is da'oraisa, chamishasar, I'm obligated at least for Kiddush and Hamotzi, even under extenuating circumstances. Incredible. The Aryeh Ben Chaim brings down that some have the minhag, interesting minhag, to eat a kezayis of matzah in the sukkah on the first night, right? So where does that come from, to eat a kezayis of matzah in the sukkah? Again, some who want to really take that gezerah shava all the way. I'm not aware that there's like a minhag to do it with matzah shmura. I don't think that there's such a minhag like that. But to go ahead and do matzah on the first night also is interesting. Okay, in any event, says the Gemara. V'oldam Rabbi Eliezer. So we'll say furthermore, Rabbi Eliezer said that again, if you missed the meal on the first night, so you missed your first night obligatory biblical meal, you can go ahead and make it up even into Shmini Atzeres. I've Ham Rabbi Eliezer, Arbas Ve'Sudos Chayiv Adam Lechol B'Sukkah Achas. I'm sorry, B'Sukkah Achas B'Yom V'Achas B'Layla. Amar Bira Amar Rabbi Yami Chazerbo Rabbi Eliezer. Ultimately, I'm going to say, so how does that help exactly? In other words, Rabbi Eliezer says you're obligated to eat 14 meals over the course of Sukkot. He's dealing now with a case where you went ahead and you missed the meal on night number 1, right? And he says you can make it up even on Shmini Atzeres. We'll say, where are you eating on Shmini Atzeres? Where are you eating on Shmini Atzeres? In your house. Again, remember, leaving aside our contemporary practices, but in its purest form, you're not eating in the sukkah, you're not allowed to eat in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, in purest form. Right? So how does making up an additional meal on Shmini Atzeres count towards your tally of 14 Sukkot meals. To which the Gemara says, you're right. Rabbi Ami, Chazir bar Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer retracted this position, right? Rabbi Bira, who was the name of a Chacham, said in Rabbi Ami that Rabbi Eliezer recanted. He recanted. What did he recant? He recanted his 14 meal obligation stance. If you take a look at Rashi, Chazir bar Rabbi Eliezer, Eitzel Chachamim Lomar She'ein Ladavar Kitzvah, Vimratzil Lisanos Yisane Chutz Milei Yom Tov Harishon, Ubahamia Polig allowed. The Kasava Yishla Tashlumin. Both say, listen to this. So Rabbi Eliezer recanted one part, but remained with the other. In other words, he took back the 14 meal obligation. It turns out that Rabbi Eliezer agrees with the Chachamim. There is no 14 meal obligation. The only obligation for a meal that exists on the Yom Tov of Sukkot is when? First night. Where Rabbi Eliezer does disagree is what happened if you missed your first night Su'udah. What happens if you missed it? According to the Chachamim, there's no makeup. If you miss it, you miss it. Rabbi Eliezer holds you can and actually have an obligation to make it up. When should you make it up? Well, ideally sometime over Sukkot. But if you didn't make it up over Sukkot, you could even make it up when? During Shmini Atzeres. That's his position. That's his position. So the Gemara says, Mashlim b'mai. So when we say that you can make up your missed meal on Shmini Atzeres, how exactly are you making up a missed meal? Ilema berifta suda diomi ka'achil. Say if you say that you're going to wash, well, you're washing anyway on your Suda Shmini Atzeres. In other words, how exactly do you make up a missed meal? Say if you want to say that you're going to add in an additional challah, you're going to bring out an additional challah during your Suda Shmini Atzeres. Chalas. In other words, once you're washing, how is it demonstrative that what you're eating during your Shmini Atzeres meal makes up for the missed meal on the first night of Yom Tov? To which the Gemara says, Elamai Yashlim b'mine targima. Both say, what should you do? You go ahead and you add on additional targima. Rashi says, mine targima, la'achar shasilek, yaviu parparos uma'adanim lefanim kigon peros, v'kisnin, v'kuflotos, mevushalos. What should you do? I will say, according to Rabbi Eliezer, if you missed your first night meal, then again, whenever you're making it up, even through Shmini Atzeres, when they remove the meal, you should bring out some additional items. Bring out some additional items that you don't normally eat. Right? So he gives examples, right? Fruit or cake, right? Kisnin usually is a reference to like these dough, like a dough thing with filling. Bring something special out, and when you bring it out, it's clearly something you don't normally eat. That'll be l'kavod suda harishona shel Sukkos. That's the makeup for the first Suda. Good. We'll say, we don't paskin this way. Right? Again, we paskin that the Suda of the first night is obligatory, but Allah Chalamai say, if you missed it, you missed it. You missed it. Good. Says the Gemara. We'll say it's great. Shal apotropos shal Agrippas hamelech es Rabbi Eliezer. We'll listen to this. So the apotropos, the officer of King Agrippas, right? King Agrippas was a Jewish king. There's a whole story of King Agrippas. We'll see by Hakel. It's a whole story. So one time, the officer of King Agrippas, so a Jewish guy, asked Rabbi Eliezer, Kigon ani, shani ragil lechol ela suda achos bayomau sha'ochel suda achos ve'eftar. So listen to this. This particular officer asked Rabbi Eliezer, you hold that there's an obligation to eat 2 meals a day in the sukkah. Now, I will say it's interesting because we just said before that Rabbi Eliezer retracted this position. Maybe this was before he retracted it. Okay, so this apotropos, this officer, says to Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi, you hold that you have to eat 2 meals a day. What about someone like me who only eats 1 meal a day? I only eat 1 meal a day. So is that enough for me to eat 1 meal a day in the sukkah? To which again Rabbi Eliezer responded, Amar lo, b'chol yom vayom atamam shich kama parparaos l'chvod atzmicha. It says you don't eat 1 meal a day. Yeah, you eat 1 meal, but it has 15 appetizers. In other words, you eat 1 meal, but you have all these other things, these parparos. So he says it's interesting. So essentially, what it says to this officer is, you have no problem pampering yourself when you want something. What HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants, do for him as well. In other words, the same way you're willing to do for yourself, do for God. You eat plenty. You eat plenty over the course of the day. You call it 1 meal, but it's not really 1 meal. You have a whole bunch of appetizers. So for Sukkot, you'll go ahead and you'll make it into 2 meals. And we'll say an incredible yesod, that the same way that sometimes, most of us would go the extra mile for our own personal comfort. right? If I had to push myself a bit more to make myself comfortable, to make myself happy, I would do so. Rabbi Eliezer is saying, whatever amount of effort you would expend for your own personal comfort, do that for the Ratzon HaBorei also. Do that for the Ratzon Hashem. An incredible yisod. Vot shalu. They asked Rabbi Eliezer another shayla. Kigon ani. This is the same guy. Listen to this, Rabbi say. Kigon ani sheyesh li shtei nashim. I have two wives. Achas b'Tveria v'achas b'Tzipori. One lives in Tveria, one lives in Tzipori. I'm sure there's a lot more to this story. I have no doubt about that. Whether or not they knew each other, knew of each other, as a different shayla. In any event, I have two wives, right? One in Tveria, one in Tzipori. This is actually fascinating, not the two-wife part. V'yeshli shtei sukkos, and therefore I have two sukkos. I have literally two sukkos. Achas b'Tveria, v'achas b'Tzipori. Mahu she'etzei misukkah l'sukkah ve'eftar. Can I, on the Yom Tov of Sukkos, transfer from sukkah to sukkah? Rashi says, she'etzei misukkah l'sukkah, lecha v'lishon hayom b'zu, u'lemachar b'zu, to spend one day, to eat and sleep one day in one sukkah, to eat and sleep one day in another sukkah. You see the shayla and you say to yourself, what are you talking about? Right? In fact, the bigger shayla is the two wives, not the two sukkahs, right? What is this? Well, say, you're going to see, Rabbi Eliezer has a dramatic shita. Listen to this. So the Gemara says, Amar lo, Rabbi Eliezer says, lo. No, you can't go from sukkah to sukkah on the Yom Tov of Sukkos. Why? Shani Omer, listen to this. Kol hayotze misukkah l'sukkah, bata mitzvasa l'rishona. I will say, this is absolutely incredible. Rabbi Eliezer says that for the Yom Tov of Sukkos, you must choose a sukkah, one sukkah for 7 days. And if you go ahead and you switch sukkos in the middle of Sukkos, not only are you not yotze the mitzvah going forward, but what? You've retroactively voided the mitzvah of sukkah up until this point. Rabbi Eliezer says one sukkah all 7 days. Look at Rashi. We'll discuss where he gets this from. So I'll say, if you switch sukkahs, literally, you switch sukkah in the middle of the Yom Tov, you've negated the mitzvah that you accrued the previous days. Ibdan lamafreya ve'ena mitzvah. Kedel f'kamash etzarach leishev kol zayin b'sukkah. Eliezer is of the opinion that you must spend all 7 days in one sukkah. So Tanya, where do we say? Well, this is incredible. Rabbi Eliezer says, Ein yotzin misukkah l'sukkah. You cannot go from sukkah to sukkah. In other words, Rashi says, you can't eat in one sukkah today, or eat in one sukkah, sleep in a different sukkah, or eat and sleep in one sukkah today, be in a different sukkah tomorrow. Ve'ein osin sukkah b'chol shel moed. Similarly, Rabbi Eliezer holds that you can't construct a sukkah on Chol Hamoed. Now, why not? We're going to see, because Rabbi Eliezer requires you to have a sukkah for all 7 days. The Chum say, Yotzim sukkah l'sukkah, va'osin sukkah b'chol shel moed. The Chum say, no, you can go from sukkah to sukkah, and that's not a problem. And you can go and you can make a sukkah on Chol Hamoed also if you need to. V'shavin, but everyone agrees that what? Shem nafla, that if your sukkah falls down over the course of Yom Tiv, shechozer ubona b'chol shel moed, that you're allowed to rebuild. Obviously, you can't rebuild it on Yom Tiv, but you can rebuild it on Chol Hamoed. So we'll say, let's analyze this, because this is actually a pretty incredible sheet of Rabbi Eliezer, that you have to have one sukkah for the entire Yom Tiv. So what's the logic here? My time with Rabbi Eliezer, what is Rabbi Eliezer's logic? Get ready for this. Says the Gemara, Amar Kra, Chag Hasukos Taselecha Shivas Yamim. We'll say the pasuk says, literally again, the Yom Tov of Sukkos you shall make for you 7 days. Listen to how Rabbi Eliezer interprets that pasuk. He says, Asay sukkah haruya l'shiva. What the pasuk is teaching me is you have to make a sukkah for all 7 days. You have to make a sukkah for 7 days. That's it. One sukkah that is going to serve you for 7 days. Incredible. But Rabbanan will say, no, that's not what it's saying. Halchi kam rachmana. Asay sukkah b'chag. Make a sukkah for Yom Tiv. Make a sukkah for Yom Tiv. In other words, Shivas Yamim, Chag HaSukkos Tasal Chashas Rabbi. It says, make a sukkah that is going to be yours for 7 days. One sukkah in which you are going to perform the mitzvah of sukkah for all 7 days. And the Chum say, no, that's not what it means. All it means is, go ahead and make a sukkah for 7 days. In other words, it doesn't have to be one sukkah. It could be 5 sukkahs. It could be 10 sukkahs. You can go sukkah hopping day to day. But Lamaisi, you just have to be in a sukkah over the course of the 7 days. The Shavin, And both agree, Shem Nafla, that if the sukkah falls down, that if your sukkah falls down, you can rebuild it in the Cholamayid. Now, what's the Chiddush? Pshita, what? That seems to be obvious. What's the Chiddush? Ma'adhem, what would you have thought? Ha'achrisihi ve'ena l'shiva. You might have thought that according to Rabbi Eliezer, perhaps when you rebuild that sukkah, how do we view that new sukkah? As a new sukkah. Something brand new that's not connected to the previous sukkah that was standing. Kamashma no. Kamashma that even in that case, Rabbi Eliezer will say the sukkah that fell down was the sukkah that was standing. When you rebuild it, there is sukkah continuity. So I will say an incredible machlokes. Rabbi Eliezer is saying, Chaga sukos tasa lecha shivas yamim, one sukkah, the entire Yom Tiv. Rabbanan saying no. All it means is you have to be in a sukkah. Which sukkah, whose sukkah, that's irrelevant. I'll tell you also, it's interesting, because I think like even on a hashkafic level, there could be a little bit of a machlokes over here. You know, the whole essence of sukkah, the Zohar writes, is Seila Dehemenusa, right? The sukkah is supposed to be the protective shade, the protective embrace. I spoke to you, right? We said this Sasemis, beautiful Sasemis, who says, what's the shear of a sukkah? What's the shear of a sukkah? 2 defanos, 2 whole walls, and a tefach. So the Sasemis says, what does that look like? What does it look like? Remember, I think I spoke this out. It's an embrace, right? 1 wall, 2 wall, 3rd wall. It's an embrace. The sukkah is the embrace of the Ribbono Shel Olam. It's the embrace. It's the Tel Demenusa. It's after Yamim Noraim. I literally, again, immerse myself in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So, you know, it's almost as if Rabbi Eliezer is saying like this, true immersion means consistency. True immersion means consistency. That's what it means. Divine immersion requires consistency. Same sukkah, all 7 days. Because if I'm not consistent, it's impossible to maintain a relationship. So you want to go into the Tzela Demenusa, you want to go into the embrace, into the protective shadow of Kodesh Baruch Hu, same sukkah, all 7 days. And the Rabbanan will say, consistency. Who amongst us is truly consistent? He says, consistency, that is the domain of the Ribbono Shel Olam. What makes HaKadosh Baruch Hu so great is that he is consistent. And by the way, he's consistently consistent, right? And what makes us is that we are inherently inconsistent. We try to be consistent, but we recognize the fact that more often than not we'll be inconsistent, at least in some way. So the Rabbana will say, just try your best. And even if you're going sukkah to sukkah to sukkah, we'll say, what does sukkah to sukkah represent? What does it represent? And we'll say, no 2 sukkahs look the same. Isn't it an incredible thing? No 2 sukkahs look the same. See, even if today you're in this sukkah, tomorrow you're in that sukkah, because it is, right? People put up their schach different ways, the decorations are differently, this, you know, all different. No 2 sukkahs look the same. So even if today you're here, tomorrow you're there, you know what? The ikar is, show up. Show up. Get yourself into the sukkah, even if it's not a consistent experience. Show up day after day after day, and that's all the Ribbono Shel Olam truly asks of you. An incredible machlokes, not just in Hilchos Sukkah, but in Hashkaf HaSachar. Rabbi Eliezer says, all about consistency. 7 days, all in, same Sukkah. Rabbanan don't disagree with you, but most of us aren't capable of achieving that level of consistency. But if I can't be consistent, at least I could be committed. We'll say here this machlokes of consistency versus commitment. Rabbi Eliezer requires consistency. Rabbanan say consistency, a little bit difficult for most of us, but I could give you commitment. I could show up day after day, even if showing up doesn't always look the same. Incredible. But Rabbanan, so the Gemara says, Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer, Omer, Kishem Shein Adam Yosei Decha Vasav Yom Tov Arishon Shal Chag Balu Lava Shal Chaveiro. But goes on. Rabbi Eliezer says, the same way that I can't be Yosei on the first day of Yom Tov with the lulav of my friend, Shene'emar Dichsev Ulakachtem Lachem. Right, Mishalachem. We're going to learn this sugya. Right, on the first day of Yom Tov, you must have your own lulav, because the pasuk says, L'kachtem lachem. You have to take your own. So the same way, you need your own lulav and esrog first day. Kach ein adam yotze de chavasa besukaso shel chaveiro. Listen to this. You also can't be yotze on Yom Tov, first day of Yom Tov, with the sukkah of your friend. Dichsev chaga sukos taseh lecha shivas yamim. Wow. That's the Shittas Rabbi Eliezer. Both say pretty good. It's a strong drasha, right? It says Lacha by Sukkah, it says Lachem by Dalad Minim, by Lulav. Just like by Lulav it has to be yours, so Rabbi Eliezer says by Sukkah it has to be yours as well. Now both say, now this is interesting, because not only is Rabbi Eliezer saying that it has to be the same Sukkah all 7 days, but what? It has to be your Sukkah all 7 days, which is very interesting. The Gemara says, the Chum say, Even though you're right that a person can't be Yotzei on the first day of Yom Tiv with his fellows lulav and esrog, you need to have your own lulav and esrog. However, aval Yotzei dechavasa b'sukaso shachaveiro. But you can be Yotzei with the sukkah of your friend. How do we know this? This is beautiful. Kala ezrach b'Yisrael yeshvu basukos. Because the pasuk says literally all of these sojourners in Israel will sit in the sukkos. Now, I will say, what I want to point out, and this is really the drasha, the way the word sukkos is written is chaser, without the vavs, right? When it's without the vavs, it's not looked at as a plural word, rather it's looked at as a singular word, which teaches me that what? Malamed shekal yisrael ru'uyim leishe b'sukkah achos, which teaches me that all of Klal Yisrael ultimately, again, could sit in one sukkah. And I will say, now, each of Rashi points out over here, if you have all of Klal Yisrael sitting in one sukkah, is it possible for every Jew to own the same sukkah? And the answer is no, because ownership has to be quantifiable financially. The minimum ownership stake in something is what? Is a shava pruta. If all of Klal Yisrael were to sit in one sukkah, would every single Jew have a shava pruta of ownership? And the answer is no. What do you see from here? That you don't need ownership over the sukkah. The sukkah does not have to be lacha. It doesn't have to be lach. It doesn't have to be yours. I will say also just this we love, but this notion of kol Yisrael ru'uyim leishe b'sukkah achas, all of Klal Yisrael could sit in one sukkah. I will say is also an incredible din in achdus. It's possible for all of us to get along. Right? It's possible for every single Jew to sit in one sukkah. Beautiful yisod. Rabbanon, hay lecha my darshibe. So what did the Rabbanon do with the lecha? Because Rabbi Eliezer uses lecha to teach me that you have to actually own your own sukkah, and you can only be yotzi in your own sukkah. What do the Rabbanan do with lecha? Interestingly enough, they say it comes to exclude a stolen sukkah. If you steal a sukkah, we'll discuss this because it's not so pashut how you steal a sukkah, right? In other words, now the truth is we live in a time like you could pop-up sukkahs, you can steal a sukkah, but b'pashtus, when you're talking about stealing a sukkah, what you're doing is going into Reuven's sukkah, kicking him out, changing the locks, right? And which is a whole shaila of karka nigzeles. We'll get to it. And then the Rabbanon say you can't be yotze with a stolen sukkah. Aval shu'ula ksiv kala ezrach, but you can be yotze with a borrowed sukkah. Sukkah doesn't need to be yours. Rabbi Eliezer, haikol ezrach my avidle. What does Rabbi Eliezer do with the phrase kala ezrach b'Yisrael yeshe basukos? Mibayle leger shenis gayer ben sayim the katan shenis gadol ben sayim. This is fascinating. So remember, Rabbi Eliezer says that you need to have the same sukkah. It has to be your sukkah and the same sukkah for all 7 days. What happens if somebody converts during Sukkot? Or what happens, forget about case of conversion, what happens if a child becomes a bar mitzvah over the course of Sukkot? He doesn't have a full 7 days. According to Rabbi Eliezer, does he have the ability to fulfill the mitzvah of Sukkah? To which Rabbi Eliezer will say yes. That's what it means when it says kala ezrach. Whoever, right? Ideally, if you're Jewish at the onset of Sukkot, you require your own sukkah and you must dwell in that same sukkah all 7 days. But if you only come into the mitzvah over the course of Yom Tov, either you converted or you become a bar mitzvah, then halacha l'maaseh you can be yotzei even though you don't have a full 7 days. V'Rabbanan, kevan she'amru osin sukkah b'chalo shamoid lo yitzrachra. The Rabbanan say that's obvious because once we know that you're allowed to make a sukkah during Chol Hamoed, that tells you that there's the possibility of what? Partial performance of the mitzvah of sukkah, even if you haven't had a sukkah the entire time. Tan Rabbanan. Both say let's at least begin this story. Tan Rabbanan. Ma'aseh Rabbi Eloi shalach lahakbil pnei Rabbi Eliezer Rabbo Belud. One time Rabbi Eloi went to visit his Rabbi Eliezer in Lud, which I will say again, we've seen already before. There's a mitzvah to visit your Rabbi on Yom Tov, on Chol Hamoed. Amar lo Eloi. So Rabbi Eliezer got upset. And Rabbi Eliezer says, Eloi, ein chamishov seharegel. You are not one who properly observes Yom Tov. Rabbi Eliezer Omer mishabeach ani esatzlanin shen yotzi matem beregel. Because Rabbi Eliezer used to say, I praise the lazy people, not in general, but in this specific context. I praise the lazy people who don't leave their homes on Yom Tov. Dichsiv v'samachta ata ubeischa. Because Rabbi Eliezer felt that on Yom Tov you're supposed to stay with your wife. On Yom Tov, you're supposed to stay with your family. So Rabbi Eliezer got very upset with Rabbi Eloi, that Rabbi Eloi left his family in order to come visit him on Yom Tov. So the Gemara says, Ini, is that so? But we learned, but we learned that a person is obligated to visit his Rebbe on Yom Tov. Shne'emar, madua at holeches elav hayom lo chodesh v'lo Shabbos. We'll say again, this is a story by the Isha from Shunam. Remember, again, we know the story. Her son had passed away. She was given a bracha of a son by Elisha Hanavi. Her son had passed away. She didn't tell her husband that the child had passed away. She was going to Elisha. And her husband said, why are you going to Elisha? Why are you going to the Navi? Why are you going to the Rebbe? It's not Shabbos, it's not Rosh Chodesh. So from here, Chazal understand there's a mitzvah to visit one's Rebbe, not just Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, but also again on Yom Tiv. Lo kashya, hada azav asa b'yamei, hada azav lo asa b'yamei. Yes, there's an obligation to visit one's Rebbe on Yom Tiv. When is there an obligation to visit? When you can make it back and forth on the same day. But if it would require you sleeping over, then you do not do that on Yom Tiv. Why? Because as important as it is to visit one's Rebbe over the course of Yom Tiv, the mitzvah of Simcha demands that we celebrate Yom Tiv together with our families, and that obligation trumps the obligation to visit one's Rebbe. So if you can visit your Rebbe going back and forth in the same day, do it on Yom Tiv. But if halacha l'maaseh requires you to stay over, don't do it. So apparently, again, Rabbi Eliezer got upset at Rabbi Eloi, because when Rabbi Eloi came to visit him, it would have required Rabbi Eloi to stay over and therefore not be with his family at Yom Tov. Also, we'll stop over here. We'll continue more incredible Gemara Meretz Hashem tomorrow. Shkoyach.